morning, everyone. Welcome to Daily Faith Builder. I hope you're well on this Monday morning of Christmas week, getting ready for hopefully a wonderful celebration, Christmas Eve and Christmas, hopefully with your family and close friends. We kicked off yesterday this idea of Jesus being the source of our joy, of the joy that comes from an intimate relationship with Jesus. We've been in Philippians 3. It's one of my favorite chapters. We see in Philippians 3 the depth of Paul's passion to know Christ and the power of his resurrection. And just his heartbeat of being set forward for the prize that is ahead of him. There's just some great stuff in there. We're going to be in it all week long and really just trying to wrestle with this idea. How does knowing Jesus produce joy in our life? And for the next 4 days, we're just going to go over 4 big theological words as we look at that. But just as we introduce this week, as we talked about yesterday, this idea is a powerful idea that we can believe God, but we can miss God. We can believe God and not know God. There's a big difference between just believing and knowing. And we need to make sure that our belief is coupled with a personal pursuit of God to know him, right? And faith is belief, yes, plus trust. Trust is personal and intimate. And that we need to make sure that that's the case. And this idea of joy, the biggest joy killers in the world we see in the Bible were religious people who believed but didn't know God. And boy, when belief without knowledge of God is dangerous, right? And we've seen that it's wreaked havoc in the history of the world. And it wreaks havoc, and every single church has to wrestle with that. And we all wrestle with it in our own lives as we kind of get pulled sometimes to the legalistic idea of just believing, or dry times where we just believe or just pack our head full of knowledge, and we miss the personal pursuit of engaging God and pursuing him. And the reality is, just to believe, there's no joy in that. Just to believe, to go through the religious motions of church and other spiritual duties without really intimate knowledge of God there's no joy in that. The joy comes in our intimate knowledge with Jesus. And Jesus promises, John 15:11 again, that he wants to put his joy, the joy of God, inside us. But that is as we walk with him and follow him and get to know him, pursue him very personally in all that. And so the 4 things we're going to look at this week, just to summarize before we dive in starting tomorrow morning, is joy begins as Paul lays out here in Philippians. He lays out the first thing is justification. How does justification produce joy in our lives? And justification is this big word, but it's very important to us to understand. Where does righteousness come from? How do we become rightly in a right relationship with God, with a holy God? How do we have the security of knowing we're his and that we're secure in that? All these the deepest heart issues in our heart that we deal with are handled here at salvation. There is no pursuit of God outside of justification. That's what happens at salvation when it begins. So we begin at that place, and then we move to this idea of sanctification that Paul talks about. How do we become holy? How do we become more like Jesus? In trusting the Holy Spirit. And how does sanctification produce joy in our life? We'll look at that later in the week. The third movement is one maybe that you haven't heard of before. It's called manifestation. We find this in 1 Corinthians 12, verse 7, where Paul says that the Spirit, to each one of us, has been given a manifestation of the Spirit for the common good, to build up others. And it's in this partnership with the Holy Spirit and the gifts of the Holy Spirit that joy comes as we see that we are ministering with God and seeing his hand move, right, in powerful ways. And then the fourth and last one is the ultimate goal, glorification, which is the promise of God. He will raise us up. He will make all things new. And as Paul says, he has his eyes set on that goal for the high calling of God, the prize, right, that we have of being called up to Christ into heaven when all things are new. And we'll dive into that. These 4 things. This is also progression of discipleship. It's also progression of how do we increase our knowledge and intimacy of walking with Jesus. And obviously in the midst of all that is an increase of joy. As we flow through each of those, coming with them is an increase in joy. And so I hope that blesses you this Christmas week as we're in this pursuit of joy, right? To realize that, the question we need to ask is, can we align with Philippians 3:10, where Paul says, I want to know him, the power of his resurrection, sharing his suffering, to become like him in his death, that I may somehow attain to the resurrection of the dead. That kind of intimate desire to know Christ is what should be revived during this time, this season especially. And with that comes the fruit of the Spirit of joy. May we again be the church that is the marker. It is the place of joy, giving joy off in our communities. God bless and Merry Christmas.